When was the last time you truly let go? Not told yourself you were letting go, not prayed the words while still gripping with both hands, but actually released something you could not control into the hands of God, and felt, even for a moment, the strange lightness that follows. Is there something you are carrying right now? A fear, a grief, a future that will not come into focus? That part of you refuses to hand over, because handing it over feels somehow like losing the last thread of safety you have left. And if you are honest in the way only silence allows, have you ever wondered whether the trust you offer God is real trust, or simply the exhausted resignation of someone who has run out of other options? There was a young woman in 19th-century France who lived inside 4 walls, wore rough wool in winter, and died before she turned 26. She had never led an army, never addressed a crowd, never written a theological treatise in the formal sense. She had, by most external measures, done almost nothing, and yet the Church declared her a doctor of the faith, one of only 37 human beings in 2,000 years of Christianity to receive that title, not for the volume of what she produced, but for the depth of what she discovered. What she discovered was this: that trust, complete, childlike, unreserved trust in God, is not a spiritual technique or a devotional posture. It is the whole of the interior life. It is the little way itself. It is, she believed, what God has always been asking for, from every soul, in every century, under every circumstance. Her name was Sainte Thérèse of Lisieux, and today we are going inside that discovery, not to admire it from a distance, to let it reach us. Welcome to this channel, a space where the wisdom of Sainte Thérèse is not kept behind glass but handed directly to you, for the life you are actually living. If no one has told you yet that this channel exists for souls who are tired, who are doubting, who are searching for something that does not disappoint, now you know. Subscribe. Because what Thérèse discovered about trusting God is not information you will want to encounter once and forget. You will need it again and again, and you will want it here, waiting for you. And if you want to go deeper, to be part of a small community that prays together, reflects together, and stays close to Thérèse in a more intimate way, consider joining our membership. The rose is always open. Come and be covered. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from too much work. It comes from too much effort made in the wrong direction. It is the exhaustion of the soul that has been trying for years to become worthy of God's love, trying to climb, trying to improve, trying to arrive at some threshold of holiness where it might finally feel safe. Thérèse knew this exhaustion. She had watched it in others. She had felt its early stages in herself. And then one day, she stopped trying to climb, not because she gave up on God, but because she understood something that changed everything. God was never waiting at the top of the stairs. God was at the bottom, arms open, asking to carry her up. This is where her understanding of trust begins, not in a grand spiritual crisis, not in a moment of mystical illumination, but in the very ordinary recognition that she was small and that smallness, properly understood, is an invitation rather than a problem. She wrote it simply, the way she wrote everything. I am a very little soul who can only offer very little things to the Lord. But she did not stop there, because what followed that recognition was the discovery that God does not require great things. God requires a great willingness to receive, and willingness, total, open, undisguised willingness, is exactly what a child has that an accomplished adult has often lost. Think about what a young child does when she is tired and cannot walk any further. She does not make a plan. She does not calculate the distance remaining. She lifts her arms toward the person she trusts, and she trusts that those arms will come down for her. She does not earn the being carried. She simply allows it. That allowing, that unhesitating, unself-conscious allowing, is the whole of what Thérèse means when she speaks of trust. Most of us, without realizing it, have replaced that allowing with something more complicated. We allow God to help us with the things we cannot manage ourselves, but we quietly maintain control over the things we think we can handle. We bring God our catastrophes and keep our anxieties. We surrender our crises and hold our futures. We tell God we trust Him, and then we lie awake at 3 in the morning, rehearsing worst-case scenarios with the thoroughness of someone who trusts no one at all. Thérèse did not do this. Or rather, she learned not to do this, and the learning cost her something. She entered Carmel at 15, full of fervor, certain that the interior life would deepen through extraordinary prayer, through penance, through effort that matched the size of her longing. What she found instead was ordinariness, long hours in silence that felt empty, sisters who irritated her, prayers that felt dry, a soul that, despite its best efforts, did not seem to be advancing in any direction she could measure. It was in this ordinariness, not despite it, that she began to understand trust. Because trust that only operates in extraordinary moments is not really trust. It is the spiritual equivalent of a fair-weather friendship. Real trust is what remains when the spiritual consolations are gone, when the prayer feels hollow, when the path ahead is obscured, when you have no evidence that anything you are doing is reaching God at all. Real trust is choosing to bring your small, empty hands to God and say, "I know you are here. I know you see. I do not need to feel it to believe it." And that kind of trust, she discovered, is not built through heroic effort. It is built through the daily, unglamorous practice of releasing the need to feel God's presence in order to trust it, releasing the need to understand the path in order to walk it, releasing the outcome of every prayer, every effort, every small act of love, trusting that God receives what God receives and that the receiving is never in question. There is something happening in you right now as you hear this. Some part of you recognizes it. The thing you are holding, you know what it is. You have been holding it so long that it has taken the shape of your palm. You do not know who you would be without the holding. But Thérèse knew. She had held things too. And she discovered that what comes after the holding, what fills the space left by the releasing, is not emptiness. It is arms, already there, already waiting. It would be easy, dangerously easy, to hear Thérèse's little way and imagine that trusting God completely is a sweet, sunlit experience. A gentle laying down of burdens, a peaceful arrival at interior stillness, easy, natural, almost effortless for a soul with faith. But Thérèse herself would stop you at the word easy. Because she is also the saint who spent the last 18 months of her life inside what she called a night of nothingness. A profound darkness of faith in which she could no longer feel, sense, or perceive God in any way she had previously known. She was 24 years old when it began. She had received her first diagnosis of tuberculosis. Her body was beginning the slow, painful process of dying, and at the very moment when a soul most needs the consolation of God's nearness, the consolations withdrew, completely without warning, and left her in a silence so absolute that, as she described it, she could hear the voice of darkness mocking the very faith she had built her life upon. She wrote, "The darkness, borrowing the voice of sinners, says to me, 'Believe in death. It will give you not what you hope for, but a night still more profound, the night of nothingness.'" Read that again. This is not a saint who never doubted. This is a saint who was assaulted by doubt at the most vulnerable moment of her existence, and who chose to keep trusting anyway. This is the part of her story that the pious illustrations do not capture. The roses, the gentle smile, the soft light around her head. None of that tells you what it actually cost her to say in the middle of that darkness. "I choose to believe, not because I feel it, not because I understand it, but because I have placed my trust and I will not take it back." That is the trust she discovered. Not trust as a feeling, not trust as a spiritual atmosphere that descends on the faithful like evening light. Trust as a decision, trust as an act of the will that holds even when the emotions have evacuated, even when the mind produces no reassurance, even when the prayer seems to go nowhere and return with nothing. What she discovered in the dark is that trust does not require light to function. In fact, she came to believe that the dark was not God's abandonment of her. It was God's invitation to love him without reward, to believe without evidence, to stay without consolation, to give without any certainty of being received. This is extraordinarily demanding, and Thérèse knew it. She was not naive about the weight of what she had been asked to carry. In one of her most quietly devastating passages, she writes to her prioress, "When I sing of the happiness of heaven and of the eternal possession of God, I feel no joy in this, for I sing simply what I want to believe." What I want to believe, not what I feel, not what I experience, what I want to believe. That sentence is the whole of it, really, because it reveals that trust, at its most mature, the trust that Thérèse lived and the trust she is inviting you into, is not the absence of difficulty. It is the refusal to make difficulty the final word. You may be in a version of that darkness right now. Not necessarily Thérèse's particular darkness, but your own. A prayer that has gone unanswered for so long that you have started to wonder whether it is reaching anyone. A loss that has rearranged the landscape of your interior life so completely that you no longer recognize where God fits in it. A doubt that arrived quietly and stayed, and that you are perhaps ashamed to admit to anyone, including yourself. Thérèse is not asking you to pretend that the darkness is not dark. She is not asking you to perform peace you do not feel. She is asking something far simpler and far harder, to say, even in the dark, I am still here. I have not left, and I believe even now that you have not left either. That staying, that choosing to remain in the relationship with God, even when the relationship gives you nothing you can hold, is what she means by complete trust. And it is not a passive thing. It is, she says, the most active thing a soul can do. Because staying when there is nothing to stay for, staying when reason offers no comfort and feeling offers no consolation, and the horizon offers no visible dawn, that staying is love in its purest form. And love in its purest form is what God has always been asking for. You do not have to resolve the darkness to trust inside it. Thérèse did not resolve hers. She carried it all the way to the end, and she carried it with open hands. And she called that carrying her most beautiful offering. One of the most subversive things Thérèse ever said, and she said many subversive things, is that the ordinary life is where God is most fully encountered. Not the extraordinary, not the dramatic, not the exceptional moment of grace that you recognize as grace the instant it arrives. The ordinary, the invisible, the unremarkable texture of a Tuesday afternoon. This matters enormously for trust, because when we imagine trusting God completely, we tend to imagine it happening in significant moments. The diagnosis, the crisis, the loss, the decision that changes everything. And those moments matter. But Thérèse is pointing somewhere else. She is pointing to the moment you pick up a glass of water and carry it across the room, to the moment you fold a garment and set it down, to the moment you answer a question you have answered 100 times before and you answer it again without resentment. She calls these moments, these invisible, unremarked, utterly common moments, the raw material of sanctity. She had learned this from her years in Carmel, where the monastic life strips away everything extraordinary and asks you to find God in what remains. And what remains is almost nothing by the world's measure. Silence, repetition, the same prayers at the same hours, the same faces at the same tables, the same small acts of charity offered to the same sisters, day after day after day. It was in that repetition that Thérèse made her discovery. That trust is not built in extraordinary moments. It is exercised in ordinary ones. Every single time she chose to do a small thing with attention, with love, without seeking recognition, she was practicing trust. Practicing the belief that God sees what the world cannot see, receives what the world would not bother to record, and counts as precious what the world considers negligible. She wrote, "Miss no single opportunity of making some small sacrifice, here by a smiling look, there by a kindly word, always doing the smallest right and doing it all for love." That phrase, doing it all for love, is the key. Because the reason Thérèse could perform small acts without frustration or discouragement was that she had stopped performing them for any human audience. She had stopped asking whether they were noticed, appreciated, or effective. She had given them entirely and irrevocably to God. And once a thing is given entirely to God, The question of whether it was received becomes God's business, not yours. This is a form of trust that most of us have not yet reached. We give things to God, but we keep one eye on the outcome. We offer our work, but we watch to see whether anyone is grateful. We perform our acts of charity, but we notice whether they are acknowledged. We love, but we monitor, quietly and constantly, whether the love is coming back. Thérèse stopped monitoring. She gave her small acts as a child gives a drawing to a parent, not calculating its artistic merit, not wondering whether it will be kept or discarded, but offering it with the simple certainty that the giving itself is received with love. And then she let it go. Think about the small acts you performed this morning, the ones no one witnessed. The moment you chose patience when impatience was easier. The quiet effort you made that benefited someone who did not say thank you, or who may not have noticed at all. The prayer you said in a gap of silence when no one was listening. Thérèse is telling you that those moments are not small at all. She is telling you that they are the ordinary altar on which the entire interior life is built. And she is telling you, and this is the part that requires real trust, that you do not need to see the result to know that the offering was received. Because trusting God completely means trusting Him with the outcomes, trusting that your small, faithful, unwitnessed acts are accumulating in a way you cannot track and will not be able to measure until much later. Trusting that the God who sees in secret rewards in secret, as the Gospel says, and that the reward when it comes will not disappoint. This is the ordinary altar, not incense and gold. Folded laundry and patient answers and small words of kindness spoken into the unrecording air. Thérèse stood at that altar every day for 9 years. She never stopped finding it sufficient, because she had understood something the world keeps trying to disprove, that the size of the love matters infinitely more than the size of the act, and love, unlike effort, is not exhausted by use. It grows by giving. Give your ordinary moments to God today, not the extraordinary ones. Those are coming whether you prepare for them or not. The ordinary ones, the ones happening right now, in the life that is already yours. And then, whatever happens next, trust. In the final weeks of her life, Thérèse could no longer hold a pen. Her hands were too weak, her body too consumed by tuberculosis, the pain too constant to permit the concentration that writing requires. But she had spent her final years producing a spiritual autobiography at the request of her sisters, and in those pages she wrote in stolen fragments of time, propped against pillows, in handwriting that grew smaller and more trembling toward the end, she had left something extraordinary, not a philosophy, not a system, not a comprehensive guide to the spiritual life. A letter, a very long, very personal letter, addressed to souls she would never meet, living in times she would never see, carrying burdens she could not have imagined. To you, because that is what the story of a soul actually is. It is Thérèse reaching across a century of distance and speaking directly into the interior of your life. Wherever you are, whatever you are carrying, whatever particular form, the question, can I really trust God with this, has taken for you. And what she says, what she keeps saying in 100 different ways across those pages, is this: yes, you can, and not just with the big things, with everything. The fears you think are too small to mention, the hopes you have stopped hoping because they have disappointed you too many times, the wounds that have been there so long you have forgotten that they are wounds, the doubts you have never spoken aloud, all of it, every last thread of it. You can trust God with all of it. She knew this was difficult to believe. She knew because she had struggled to believe it herself. Not in theory, she had believed it in theory since she was a child, but in practice, in the living of it. In the moment when the darkness descended and the consolations withdrew and the body began to fail and the voice of doubt grew louder than the voice of faith, it was in that moment that she made the choice that defines everything she is and everything she teaches. She chose trust. Not because it was easy, not because it made sense, not because the evidence supported it, but because she had read the Gospels and she had seen what Jesus said to souls who came to him with nothing, and she had decided that what he said was true. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." She came, with all of it, and she found rest. Not the absence of suffering, not the resolution of every difficulty, not the lifting of every weight, but the particular rest that belongs to a soul that is no longer fighting alone. The rest of being carried. There is something she understood about God's mercy that most of us underestimate. She writes, "I know that one must be very pure to appear before the God of all holiness, but I know too that He is infinitely just, and it is this justice which frightens so many souls that is the subject of my joy and my confidence." That is a startling sentence. The justice of God, the thing that frightens people, is the source of her confidence. Because she had understood that God's justice is not punitive in the way human justice so often is. God's justice is the justice of a father who knows exactly what his child has and has not been given, who knows every wound and every limitation and every darkness that shaped the choices that were made, and who judges accordingly, with a knowledge so complete that it encompasses mercy as its necessary counterpart. She trusted that. She trusted that she would be judged not against an abstract standard of perfection, but against the truth of her own particular soul, its particular history, its particular smallness, its particular and sincere desire to love, even when the love was weak and imperfect and constantly failing. She trusted that this was enough, that sincere desire, even when execution fails, even when effort disappoints, even when the soul arrives at God's hands emptier than it had hoped, is received, is honored, is, in the economy of divine love, sufficient. Can you let yourself believe that today? Not perfectly, not with the full-throated, untroubled confidence of someone who has never doubted, but even partially, even tentatively, even in the halting, one-day-at-a-time way that is the only way most of us can manage. Can you offer God what you actually have, rather than waiting until you have something better to give? Thérèse never had something better to give. She had herself, small, imperfect, frequently tired, occasionally frightened, carrying a faith that was sometimes nothing more than the desire to have faith, and she gave that, all of it, into hands she trusted, even when she could not feel those hands. And in the last moments of her life, she said, words that have been recorded by those present in the room, she said, "I do not regret having surrendered myself to love. No regret, not one thread of it. After everything, after the dark night, after the pain, after the diminishment, after the doubt, not one regret. That is what complete trust produces, not the absence of difficulty, not a life that unfolds without shadows, but the particular freedom of a soul that has given everything to love and discovered, in the giving, that love holds what it receives. She is still reaching. That letter she could not finish writing, she is still writing it. One soul at a time. In the small hours of the night when you are too tired to pray and the burden feels too heavy and you do not know how to let go, she is still saying, "Give it to Him. He is already there. He has been there the whole time. You stayed. I want you to know that I see that. You did not click away when the questions were uncomfortable. You did not leave when the darkness was described. You sat with it, and that sitting, that willingness to remain with something that costs you something, is itself a form of the trust Thérèse is teaching. She remained, always, in every difficulty, in every darkness, in every silence where God felt absent. She remained. And she is asking you to remain too. Not just in this video, but in the interior life, in the relationship with God that gets difficult and dry and confusing, and that requires, sometimes, nothing more and nothing less than the decision to stay. If you want to stay in a community that is built around that kind of fidelity, people who are genuinely trying to live the little way in real life, in real difficulty, with real honesty, our membership is here for you. It is a small group, close and intentional. We pray together. We reflect together. We carry the hard weeks together. Thérèse called her Carmelite community her little family. This is a little family too, and it has a place for you. Come and be covered too.